Hey, is this thing on? Hello? Hit it again. I think it's on now. Welcome to Hiker Trash Radio, where each week, Doc will drag some colorful characters out of the woods to talk trail and Type 2 fun. If you're aspiring hiker trash, or if you're just looking to understand the hiker trash in your life, look no further. So lace up those boots, gnaw on some jerky, and settle into your 20-mile pace as we fire up the podcast from somewhere deep in the backcountry. It's time to embrace the suck.
Welcome back to another week on the trail, dirtbags, hiker trash, and of course, good smelling day hikers. I'm Doc, and this is Hiker Trash Radio. Hey, if you like what we're doing here, take just a minute, help us out, leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, and help us move up the charts. And if you don't like what we're doing, just go ahead and keep that to yourself. All right. Let's get to this week's guest, an experienced thru hiker who decided to get creative and take his hiking to the next level. Welcome to Hiker Trash Radio, Dylan Ivens. How's it going, Dylan?
Doing pretty well. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Did I get the last name right? We didn't talk about that beforehand.
Yeah, you're all good.
Okay, Ivens. Love it. Now, we usually go by trail names here on the podcast. Doc is not on my paycheck or driver's license. During all your time on the trail, have you picked up a trail name, Dylan?
Yeah, pretty quick. When the PCT was my first, I became RightOn.
RightOn. Tell us the story behind that.
So nothing too special, but yeah, first couple weeks, you're meeting everyone and asking, where they're from, all this and that, and small talk. And I guess my common response was always, oh, right on. And the guys I was hiking with, just at some point just turned and looked at me. So you say that a lot, maybe too much. I think you're going to be right on. And I don't know if this is true, but in my mind now, the memory is just me looking back at him and saying, oh, right on. As far as trail names go, that's not so bad. I'm fine with that.
Classic. Now I'm gonna have you on the clock tonight. I'm gonna count how many times you say right on. Are you self-conscious about that now? Do you avoid it, or how does that work?
After that became the trail name, I definitely was. It was in my head for a little while, but that's so long ago now that everything's just, it's all good. I'm sure I still say it quite a bit. Okay,
we'll start a tally. Hey, right on. Have you had a chance to listen to the podcast before?
Yeah, I've heard a handful of episodes. One I think that you did with the guy that made the Croatian long distance trail.
Yes.
That really sparked my eye because that, as we'll get into, is in my wheelhouse for the area that goes through, and then drew my attention to the podcast, and I've listened to a handful since. So yeah, it's all good stuff.
Yeah, you and Nicola Horvat are kindred spirits.
I bet.
I think so. See, that was the appropriate time to say it right on.
I am a little self-conscious now. I am thinking of it. I don't want to run the tally up too much. Yeah.
I shouldn't have said anything. I should have just revealed the tally at the end.
Yeah.
All right. Hey, the only reason I ask if you listen to the podcast, because you probably noticed a change. We introduced ourselves tonight as Hiker Trash Radio, and you probably listened to the John freaking Muir pod.
Yeah, I listened to one this morning, actually, just to kind of keep everything fresh for me. And it was one of the newer ones. So I was aware of the recent switch. Yeah,
we did a little rebranding. We're very happy with that. That's been going well. Also want to make sure that you are aware of a segment that we do towards the end of each episode called The Hiking Hack. And that's where you'll have a chance to share some trail wisdom with our listeners to make their next outdoor experience even better.
Got it. I'm ready. I got one loaded, but we'll wait.
Okay, yeah, don't use it up too early. That's right. All right. That's right. It's time for the Trailblazers Toolkit, sponsored by the ultralight backpacking gear company, Six Moon Designs. Now, right on, I love to talk about gear on the podcast, and I love to hear about the most important item in my guest's adventure gear. So if you were preparing for your next adventure, and I was the one providing you with all your gear, what is the one specific piece of gear you would insist on being packed? Make sure to give me all the specifics on that piece of gear and tell me why you got to have it out there. And this can be any type of item. It could be gear. It could be apparel. It could be a luxury item. So right on, what is that item in your toolkit?
It's always tough to think of something for in general, right? Because I'm a big proponent of take stuff that's suited to what you're going to need. And especially with now that I've spent a bit of time on the trail, I've got that big gear closet that's getting probably a little too full. But in terms of something that I would always need, I'm thinking something like water filter. Like Sawyer Squeeze is my go-to. It has been since day one, and I can't think of a trip backcountry where I'm not going to want to have something for that. So I think that'd be my choice. And actually, it's also what I've got a little tip for that, but I'm holding that one back. We'll get to it, but it just works, right? It's a standard out on the trails for a reason.
Fantastic. You hit the buzzer word. You said Sawyer is one of our sponsors. And so that earns you an extra 10 points on the hiking pole. So congratulations on that. Way to go.
Oh, good stuff. I didn't even know those were bonus points.
I just instituted that tonight. So I'm doing it on the fly. Now, you talked about your gear closet. How big is your gear closet? How much gear is in there?
So it's not a physical closet. I've got like a good sized bin that's just full of stuff. I also last year converted a van and took that out to Western Canada and all that. So there's a bunch of gear in storage in that as well that has, didn't make it. I look at it now and like I built myself another shelter this spring. I don't need more shelters, but I had an idea that I wanted to try. So I can't help it.
Yeah, let's just get a feel for this right now. How many backpacks do you have?
Oh, I've got 2 down here right beside me, and then another, I'd say four working packs that are in good enough condition that I could give to someone.
Okay. How many tents / tarps / bivvies do you have?
Oh, I don't know. At least 6. Again, it's hard to draw the line as to what was a failed experiment or not. I've made a bit of my own gear.
And how about sleeping bags / quilts?
That one's not too bad. It's just 2.
Okay. That's reasonable.
Yeah.
Reasonable. Now, Dylan, where are you from? I'm picking up a bit of a Canadian accent.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, Southern Ontario.
Southern Ontario. Very nice. Okay. Hey, let's keep talking about gear as we move to our next segment. That's right. It's the hiking pole, and that's pole spelled with 2 L's, like a survey, not like the things you carry out in your hands out on the trail. I like to explain that to all my guests because I think I'm pretty clever coming up with that. I'm all on my own, and their reaction every time is pretty much the same as you have right now, just a kind of a blank stare. But we'll leave that as it may be. Now, this is a 7-question survey that's going to help me give you a score on the sanity scale from 1 to 100. 1 being completely insane to 100 being completely sane. Now, there's an automatic 25-point deduction. We're just going to make that a 15-point deduction today because you earned the bonus points for mentioning Sawyer. Automatic 25-point deduction usually for anybody who's done 1 or more of the long trails in America, like the PCT, the CDT, the AT. Highest possible score as of right now is 85 for you. Are you nervous about this?
I think I know where I'll sit, and I've accepted it.
Okay, very good. Now, is your score for yourself higher or lower than your score from your friends and family that they would give you?
Oh, no, I'm pretty honest with myself, and I think I could gauge what their score for me would be. They're all very supportive, but if you ask them, what do you think of the stuff he does? They'd be, oh, yeah, he's nuts. Yeah.
All right. Question number 1, fairly easy. Trekking poles or no trekking poles out there?
Ooh, this is tricky because, like, right from the bat, it's curveball. What about trekking pole, singular?
Dylan, we have 2 types of guests on the podcast. We have those that fall into the conventional answers, and we have the other people that come up with their own answer that is not offered.
Oh, it's not a this or that, though. Most of my hiking has been with 1 pole. I'd say if someone says, do you use trekking poles? The closer answer is yes, even though it's only 1, because I'm not a 0 trekking pole person. I appreciate the use of trekking pole or poles for sure. But for me, I started the PCT and most hikes after that by using a single pole pyramid style shelter. So even though I started with 2 poles on the PCT, I think I broke one of them. I forget. This is back in 2014. And 1 pole just seemed to work because, I don't know, you can still get the stability on water crossings and grab a stick if you really want it, if it's dicey. It works to use for my shelter. And then not having the second one didn't seem to be too bad. And I got a hand free for an umbrella, snacking, checking your phone, all that good stuff. So yeah, I've been a one pole guy for a while now, but trekking poles are a good thing. If you're not a user and you're getting into hiking, definitely, yeah, worth checking out.
All right. I love that the way you phrased that. If someone asks you, do you use trekking poles? Yes is the closer answer. That's a unique way of putting that. That's a good turn of phrase. All right. So one hiking pole, one trekking pole kind of guy. Yeah. Got it. All right. Question. You're doing fine because this isn't rapid fire. You're giving some explanation and context for your answer, which always helps me with the scoring. So I appreciate that.
Okay.
All right. Question number 2. What's on your feet, boots or trail runners? Or is there a third option that I have?
Oh, some crazy person's going to say like barefoot or something, but I'm trail runners all the way. Yeah. Same thing. I think earlier before I got into through hiking and I did my first overnight hikes, I started off not quite boots, but like hiking shoes, like your Merrell, Moabs, that kind of a thing. And the nice thing with those is they actually last more than 4 weeks on trail. But yeah, like lighter, drier, fast drying and all that. Yeah, it's trail shoes all the way.
And do you have a specific brand that you prefer?
I got pretty wide feet, so like the Ultras, the Topos, anything that like that. I like the natural foot shape. I think that makes sense for feet, for shoes, especially if you're going to be like running and putting miles on them. Yeah, but oftentimes for long trails, it comes down to what's on sale because those things add up.
That's right. Good sale, never hurt anybody. There you go. All right. Question number 3. When it comes to your shelter out there, are you a tent guy, tarp, hammock, bivvy, or hey, let's just cowboy camp?
Tarp for me. Yeah. I'll cowboy camp if conditions are clear and reliable, but in general, it's a tarp. I've always been comfortable enough without the fully enclosed kind of thing. And yeah, and they're just light and simple. And yeah, I don't think I've done any, trying to think if I've done any long hikes with anything different, but no, it's been tarp or shaped tarps, right? Something like your Gatewood Cape or your, tarp all the way.
All right. Another 10 bonus points there. As you mentioned, the Gatewood Cape, which is another sponsor, 6 Moon Designs. Dylan, you're killing it, man. You're doing great. Now, how far down the rabbit hole have you gone with tarp pitches?
Do you mean like types of pitches, like for crazy flat tarp stuff?
Correct.
I never actually owned a flat tarp. So from day one, it was shaped. So I did the PCT and the CDT and stuff like that with a Gatewood Cape and just ran that thing into the ground. And then I splurged on a Z-Pax Hexamid, like their pocket tarp with the storm doors, like not a tent at all, but that same kind of shape. And I did use that one on the Europe hike, we might talk about a bit. And but I haven't gone down like the whole origami tarp rabbit hole, although I'm the kind of person who would definitely love to do that. Yeah.
Yeah. I've lost a few hours on a Saturday on YouTube doing some research. All right. Question number 4. When it comes to your sleep system, a sleeping bag or quilt?
Quilt. Yeah. I think quilts just make sense. It's something that I did change. I started the PCT with more of a traditional sleeping bag and it was synthetic. And that was just because I think I had read too much about people saying, oh, in Washington, everything's going to get soaked and nothing ever dries. And synthetic seems to make a lot more sense. And cost wise, it's a little easier. And I hadn't really dove headfirst into all this at the time. But yeah, eventually I just realized, if I'm just crushing all the insulation, that's just dead weight. And it's more versatile, kicking a leg out on a hot night. So I think quilts are the way to go. They just make sense, at least for 3-season conditions. I don't do a lot of like winter or like mountaineering kind of stuff, but maybe that would change things a little. I don't know.
Yeah, you could take a quilt that's rated to -20, but I think they call that a weighted blanket.
Yeah. Or some guys will start like stacking stuff like a quilt, and then you also have a synthetic bag over top. But that's a little outside my wheelhouse.
Smart. All right. Question number 5. Very dangerous question here, Dylan. Major point deduction depending on how you answer. Not even a sponsor mention will save you on this one. When it comes to your food, stove, cold soak, or stoveless?
Oh yeah, no, yeah, I remember your feelings on this. I'm safe though. I've done a couple like fast and light trips where you're just gonna live on bars or something, but no, I'll take a stove. I like having a hot meal at the end of the day.
Yes, have to have that hot meal. All right, question number 6: is life better above or below the tree line?
Oh, above 100%. Yeah, that's why I hike. It's not just to see mountains from below, but to be up there. Yeah. If there's ever a choice between a low route and a high route, it's always the high one as long as the weather's not a danger and all that. Yeah, no, I want to be as high as possible for as long as possible. Ridge walks, all that. That's the goal.
That's why we're out there.
Exactly.
All right. Question number 7, last question in the poll. What's more important, pack weight or luxury items?
Pack weight, I'm going to say. If I had to look back on all my trips, sometimes if I'm going for a slower casual thing with friends, then yeah, you want to have some fun and be comfy in camp. But for long trips, if there's been too many times now when people look at my pack and even other like through hikers and give you a little side eye for what you're sleeping on or the size of your shelter. It's okay, I know where I sit. Yeah.
So side question here. What is your base weight?
Yeah, nothing really too crazy. I think last year I hiked the GDT, the Great Divide Trail, up through the Canadian Rockies, and it would have been like, I didn't have a scale with me or anything, and I wasn't really like spreadsheeting that whole thing, but it probably was like, I don't know, 9 or 10 pounds, something in that range. And then as PCT, my first hike was like 14, I think, 14, 15. Then it like slowly came down from there. Sometimes I had a bit more camera gear. Sometimes yeah. But yeah, so nothing I'm not going to be that guy that's carrying around 7 pounds of gear. I just don't think I'm ever going to go that hard. And for a really long hike, I don't know, that seems like there's a lot of conditions that you're trying to cover with that amount of gear versus an overnight in California where you're not going to get rained on. Yeah, that's where I live. 10 to 12 pounds, I'm super comfortable.
Do you cut the extra straps off your packs?
I don't actually. For the waist strap and stuff like that, one of the guys I started the hike with in Europe gave me he grilled me a bit for that. He had a term for it too, for like having those long flappy straps there. Like it was all in fun, but it was like, that's a trail insult, isn't it? Or I wish I could remember what he called me for it, but yeah, he did not approve.
Sounds like there's a lot of trail shaming out there.
There's a little bit. We were good buddies, so I knew where it was coming from. But yeah, you can definitely go there.
All right. And when you're really going out there, you hit your pace on a long trail. What is your average daily mileage? These are not questions that are factoring into your score, just curiosity, follow-up questions based on some of your comments.
Yeah, it depends on the trail, right? How hard the miles are. PCT, it was nothing crazy. 20s to in the 20 up to 30 range, pretty regular. And then did a one day, like 24 hours, more get up early and just hike really late. How far could we go? And hammered out a 52. On the CDT, had a plan with a buddy to do some consecutive 37s to catch. Our friends wanted to go on the Anaconda cutoff, which was much shorter, and we wanted to stick to the normal CDT route, but we also still wanted to hike with these people. We're like, let's just crunch the numbers. That's going to take them X number of days, and if we just do 5 37s back to back, we'll get to the same spot on the trail. Sounds like a plan. So yeah, sometimes when I'm motivated, I'll hammer it out, but other times it's 20 somethings.
That's a lot of trail math right there. This is not just about walking. You're doing some complex mathematical equations out there. And that's a perfect segue, because I'm going to take your answers. I want you to stand by. We need to put them through I almost said John freaking Muirpod. I'm going to put them through the Hiker Trash radio algorithm and see if we come up with a score for you. Stand by. I got to carry the 2. Going to multiply that by pi. We're going to divide by root 5. And we're going to adjust slightly for a broken hiking pole on the PCT. And I come up with a score of 41.
Yeah, I thought it'd be closer to the bottom of the scale than the top.
Yeah, it would have been 21 because you got some bonus points in there.
Oh, that's right.
You saved yourself.
I mean, the stove is the only thing keeping me away from the single digits at this point.
That's right. That's right. So nice job there. All right. Hey, before we get too far down the trail RightOn, why don't we back up a little bit? Tell us about your background, where you grew up, what kinds of sports and hobbies you were involved in as a kid, and how did you get involved in the thru hiking cult? And I always love to hear about what your family and friends think about your endeavors.
Yeah, grew up in Southern Ontario, about an hour north of Toronto. And Southern Ontario is a fairly flat place. We don't really have mountains. But we do have a lot of lakes, especially as you move a little further north. There's a lot of good opportunities for backcountry canoe trips. There's a place, a provincial park called Algonquin Provincial Park, which is well known and really well traveled for folks around here. And so multi-day backcountry canoeing routes, like people do up in the Boundary Waters and stuff like that in the US, that's a big scene up here. And I had done some of that, one trip per summer for a few years. So I love the outdoors, and I was used to doing some overnight stuff. But the idea of like long distance hiking in the mountains never really was a thing on my radar until in college, we would say university, but college for the Americans listening. I went to visit a buddy right at the end of my summer break who had been living and working in Germany at the time. And since I was going to be traveling all the way to Europe, I thought, well, there's no point in going there, seeing him and not seeing a little bit of Europe. So I took a train down to Switzerland and spent a few days in the Swiss Alps and just stayed in a hostel. And on one day, just hiked up this mountain that was just out the back door, basically. And being in that area, and it was actually this village called Lauterbrunnen, Switzerland. And if you're
I've heard of it.
You're familiar.
I have not been there.
I
want to go there. It seems unreal.
Yeah, it's crazy. And that's why I picked it. I just Googled, I want to see, I'm going to Europe. Let's like see some of the nicest natural stuff in Europe and the coolest history stuff. So I spent a few days in the Alps, went down to Rome for a few days, flew home. And my time in the Alps was just like jaw dropping. It's like, I need more of this. So a couple of years later, I did some overnight trips in the Canadian Rockies with my dad, and then planned. But by the time I was graduating, I had learned about the PCT and just knew that, okay, I've got to give this a shot and see what this is all about. And from there, I was a goner.
Nice. Now, you mentioned canoeing. I'm curious about that. I've talked to a few people who have done some serious canoeing adventures. What do you see as if someone were to ask you, what is the biggest challenge for a multi-day canoeing trip versus what is the biggest challenge for a multi-day backpacking trip? I mean, how do those compare?
I'd say and again, some of the details will change depending on the trip, as everything always does. But as a general rule for backpacking, the amount of stuff you're carrying has a pretty big impact on your enjoyment, because you're just spending so much time on your feet, and then all that weight's just on your back. Whereas canoeing, it's just sitting in the boat. So except for the times where you've got to carry your canoe to get past some rapids or to cross over into the next lake when something isn't navigable by the water, that's the only time where the weight of your stuff really matters. And if those are just small parts of your trip, then you just make an extra trip and carry that like cooler of fresh frozen food you've got, or whatever your luxuries are. You can carry so much more, right? So it changes the dynamic. You're not so laser focused on everything being really lightweight. But then I'm not sure what the challenges would be. Maybe you're a little more exposed to the weather. Canoeing in the rain and like in a storm is pretty miserable. There's no hiding, right? Like you can hike through the trees in the rain and it's not that big of a deal. Throw on a rain jacket and just keep going. But if you're on the water, it sucks.
All right. Now, what are you doing these days to pay the bills? How do you finance your next big adventure?
Yeah, tricky. I don't really have much of a career to speak of. By training, I should be a high school math and physics teacher. That's my educational background. I did work for a couple of years for an adult education nonprofit, like helping people get their GED and like high school equivalency, that sort of a thing. That's what I was doing right before the big Europe hike to save up in that. But mostly it's been more like seasonal. And when I'm in Canada, I've got a few things. I've got a bit of a background in the trades. And I've got some friends and family that are generous enough to take me on when they've got work and projects on the go. And my brother is an arborist as well as a teacher, but during the summers, he's got a tree business. So I've done work with him throughout the years. I did a season of tree planting a couple of years ago in Northern Ontario. That's a very unique kind of job that I think a lot of people haven't heard of. But strangely, I think it's great for thru hikers because it's piecework. You're outside all day and you just make as much money as the harder you work. And literally, the more trees you plant, the more you get paid. So you just plant little 6-inch seedlings all day, every day for 10 cents a tree. And you do a couple thousand of them a day and you go home with $200 in your pocket. So it's an interesting, that was an interesting 3 months of my life, but there's no real answer. It's a little bit of this and that, some private tutoring on the side when I feel like it. Yeah.
Got it. We have some math and science openings down here in my school district. So if you find yourself in Southern California looking for some full-time work, just look me up.
Oh, California sounds good, man. That's tempting.
All right. And you mentioned a brother. How many siblings do you have?
Just one younger brother.
And is he also in the outdoor adventure cult?
He's certainly outdoorsy. He hasn't gone on any through hikes or anything, but I think he'd be into it, and I think he'd be good at it. He's a pretty strong, athletic guy. He came out for a week with me during my Europe hike, and he was out on those canoe trips back when we were younger and stuff. So yeah, we love the outdoors, but the extent that I've taken it to was unprecedented in my family. Certainly not the reason I got into it.
Got it. Okay. Hey, we're going to take a quick break. We're going to pay some bills here from the advertisers. And when we come back, we're going to hear about some of your past hikes, including this European hike that you keep referring to. We'll label it here as the Trans-European Alpine Route, correct?
Correct.
Okay. If you are interested in that, stay tuned. We'll be right back. And welcome back. We're talking to RightOn, also known as Dylan Ivens. And Dylan, I don't think you've said RightOn once yet. I'm really disappointed.
And I even stopped thinking about it. This is actually natural. So maybe it's worked its way out of me. I don't know.
Right on. Okay. You have a lot of miles under your trail runners. How many miles total do you think you have since you started hiking?
Oh.
Do you keep a running tally?
I kind of tally them up at some point. I think maybe like last year before I did the GDT, and it was like, it's got to be like 12 or 13,000 now, something like that. It's in that ballpark.
Including the Trans-European Alpine Route?
Oh, yeah, that's a big chunk.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So how old were you when you hit the PCT?
24.
24.
Well, I turned 24 on trail.
Okay. Now, do you remember when you first heard about this trail that went from Canada to Mexico and realizing you could walk the entire route? It's always a unique, it's an interesting piece of information for me, is when people realize that this thing exists.
Yeah, it's eye-opening for sure. I was researching. I had been in this all through college. At the end of the summer, I'd work all summer and then reward myself with the last 2 weeks were my little vacation before heading back for the next year of school. And so I was looking for, okay, what would be a good, awesome hike to do? I was getting more and more into the outdoors, and one that keeps popping up on my radar is like the JMT. It's world famous. And so it was while I was looking at information about the John Muir Trail that you stumble upon, it overlaps with the Pacific Crest Trail. And you click that Wikipedia link, and what's that? And then your eyes just go wide, and you're like, what? Yeah. And then it was just, fixated on it and decided after college, like, that's the window, right? You do this now before you get a real job. And little did I know, here we are.
Now, being from the north, did you start and did you do a southbound, or did you do the traditional northbound route?
Northbound, yeah.
Because it's like walking home, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I'm from Canada. I'm just walking home.
Just walking home. That's all I'm doing. Yeah. Very good. So you're an outdoorsy guy. Sounds like you've had a lot of outdoor experiences, even prior to the PCT. You've had some overnighters, done some smaller trips, or was the PCT your first attempt at overnight backpacking?
I had done some overnighters, but the longest I had done, honestly, as a backpacking trip would have been 3 days, was the Skyline Trail, which is up in the Canadian Rockies in Jasper National Park. Beautiful. But I did that. I had done that years prior when I was out there with my dad doing some hiking. And the PCT was definitely a next level step up.
I think you skipped a couple levels. Go from 3 days to how long did it take you?
I think 142, 145, something like that. It was just like 4.5 months.
Yeah, that you skipped a couple levels there, Dylan.
But it's, I agree. You're not wrong. But at the same time, for anyone like considering something like the PCT, if you really just think of it as a bunch of 4 or 5 day trips stacked one after each other, that's all it is. You got to be able to, your body has to keep up with that, but you can not break it down into those chunks, and it's okay. Suddenly it's reasonable.
That is one of the big lessons that we talk about occasionally on the podcast here, is the power of incremental progress and breaking huge challenges into small sections, right? If you get up, you break camp, you walk to the next campsite, you set up camp, you eat, you go to sleep, you get up and you do that again. You do that 141 times in a row, and you're done, right? Basically.
That's it.
Yeah. Simple.
Yeah.
Yeah. So even though you've only done 3 days before this, yeah, it's just a series, a series of about 50 3-day trips, and you're good. And so what were your expectations going in?
I'm someone who likes to dive in and do a lot of research for stuff like this. So I had read as much as I thought I could. I think my gear was fairly dialed. I wouldn't say it's not like I nailed it first try, but I also wasn't looking at my pack thinking of all the mistakes I had made a few weeks in or something. But you really just can't, or you can research it and you plan and you prepare yourself as much as possible, but then you actually get there and then you're just in it. So it's a pretty surreal feeling. I remember like getting dropped off at the border and you're like, okay, here we go. Do I know what I'm doing? And then you just start walking and the first couple of days go by and you're like, oh, yeah, we're walking. All right. And then you just roll with it.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of different types of people. I hate to categorize people, but they fall into some categories sometimes. You have your planners. You have people that really do a deep dive, and planning for all the logistics and doing your research is half the fun of a big hike for some people. They really get into it. And there are others who either they travel with somebody who is a big planner and they don't have to worry about it, or they just flow and take things as they come. Sounds like you're a big planner.
Yeah, I'd say I'm a planner, but I also like to plan, or at least to go into something informed enough and with a good enough idea so that I'm not stressing about the unknowns, right? I feel like I'm still in control and I've got things figured out. I still want there to be surprises, and there's going to be on something this big. But I think it's better to at least know what you're getting into.
Now, 2014, was that a big snow year, or was it
low snow year? I got off super easy on the PCT, especially like looking at some of the pictures from this year for 2023. It's even 2011 was a bad year. I'm pretty sure. I think 17 or some other high snow years. And in further future trips, I was talking to some other hikers that you come across on other long trails, CDT and whatever, and you just swap stories, and it's just crazy the difference that makes. I think I had two stream crossings where I actually had to get my feet wet, where I couldn't just rock hop, and anyone that hiked on a normal year or obviously for a high snow year, they're telling me about when they were holding their pack above their head crossing Evolution Creek, and I'm sorry, I didn't have to do that.
Yeah, what are the implications for PCT hikers this year with Snowmageddon having taken place in California?
Yeah, I'm pretty far removed from it now, so I just get the little trickles in from social media and stuff. But with the snowpack they had over this winter and this spring, the water crossings, the runoff has just got to be insane out there. So I have no idea what that's. The thing that water crossings in a big raging spring melt torrent, obviously danger of getting swept off your feet, and there you go. But even like when you still have a bunch of lingering snow and you're crossing on snow bridges, and you want to be confident that is good, right? I can't imagine something. The only thing worse than losing your footing, I would imagine, on a stream crossing is going through a snow bridge and being under snow. I don't know. I don't want to fearmonger. I'm sure people are being reasonable, and maybe I'm overblowing it, but these are what come to mind from someone who got off easy on a very low snow year. So yeah, I hope everyone's staying safe out there.
Yeah, this might be a 2 trekking pole season, right?
Yeah, exactly. And snowshoes, the whole lot.
That's right. Hey, what were some of the highlights from your PCT trip?
Yeah, I think I look back on the PCT with just rose-colored glasses the whole way, because it was my first long hike, right? So everything was it's just an amazing experience. Oregon and Washington are standout. Obviously, California was great too, the Sierra and stuff, but I fell in with a really good group through Oregon and Washington, and we were just having a lot of fun because the people are so much of a part of the experience, right? And what you remember. So that was great. And yeah, the 2 guys that I hiked that 52-mile day with, that was just surreal. That was a big moment of not just doing the PCT, but doing something like that where you're like, okay, I mean, walking all day. Now I know I can do it day after day, but conceptually, yeah, I figured, okay, I'm probably capable of walking all day. Putting in a 20-mile day and stacking those is, it's more than other people are used to, but it doesn't seem impossible. Whereas you go and throw down a 52 and you're like, oh, I didn't know my legs had that in them. And then you can still move the next morning. This is crazy. It's one of those things where you just keep pushing the levels of what you thought you knew you were capable of. And then, yeah, so that's just a pretty special feeling in itself. So that was a really cool day.
Yeah, 52, that's 2 marathons.
That was the reason for it. Yeah.
Even walking a marathon, right? You're going to be sore the next day. That's a lot of walking. To do that twice and then get up and be able to hike the next day, that's just incredible.
Yeah, it's eye-opening. Thankfully, we did it into, like, we camped at the start of it to give ourselves exactly 52 miles to the road where we were going to hike into town. So we knew we had days off ahead of us. Just in case, we didn't know how that was going to go. But yeah, you get up and you expect to be stiff or to not even be able to get up. And then you're like, oh, this is not terrible. I'm glad I'm taking a day off, but yeah, it's cool.
All right. From that 2014 PCT hike, best trail magic.
Oh, best trail magic on the PCT. Probably the first trail magic that I hit was, because I didn't expect to see it so early. It was right more or less on trail. Trail Angel Mike, like he's got a property just off the trail, or at least he did. I don't know if that's still a thing. Anyway, short detour, and he wasn't even there at the time, but there were signs and stuff to just walk around the back, and you open these coolers and they're full of like sodas and beer just on ice, and you're I forget what it is, 100 miles into the Southern California section. So the thought of like cold sweet drinks is just, it's exactly what you're craving. And that was just, yeah, I'm sure there was so much other magic that I'm forgetting, but that first experience was like, I can't believe people just do this for you.
Do you think Mike's neighbor was just pulling a prank on him?
Just putting the signs up?
Yeah.
Oh, I hope so. That'd be hilarious. It's pretty far out there, but yeah, that'd be a funny twist.
All right. And then also from your PCT hike, most memorable hitch.
On the PCT, we had a guy that, we had a hitch down to Trout Lake in Washington, where my buddy was just, he had talked to this guy up at the pass or on the road, and it was just like waving us over. And then the guy had offered kind of one lift for just a few of us, but it turned, and then he wheeled that into getting us to stay on his property. And by the end of the night, there was like a dozen hikers there. It was it just kept going and going. So it all started with that one hitch. Yeah. So that was a crazy time.
Yeah. You give a hiker an inch, they take a mile.
Oh yeah.
That's right. All right. Okay. So how much later did you do the CDT?
So the CDT was in 2016, so 2 years later, but the CDT was actually immediately after my time in New Zealand hiking Te Araroa. So I did those exactly like back to back. So I was in New Zealand for their summer, but the North American winter of 15-16, and then finished that in March, I think. And then in April started the CDT northbound of 2016. Wow.
So how many months in a row were you on trail?
9, I think.
Wow.
Like four or so for New Zealand, and then 5 and a bit for the CDT, something 9 or 10. Yeah.
That's a serious commitment to the trail. No wonder you're unemployed.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But the legs looked great.
Nice. Oh, let's not skip over the TA. And I know it's a bit redundant to say the TA, because I think the T in TA stands for the in the Aboriginal language of New Zealand, but I'm going to say it anyway. Tell us about your time on the TA.
I'm so glad it's funny because I probably would have called you on it. I'm always calling people out on that. So I'm glad you just right up front.
Hey, RightOn. You're not my first TA hiker I've talked to, believe me.
I'm sure. Yeah, it's great. New Zealand's a beautiful country. I started at the north. I was hiking southbound, started at the north end, but about 3 weeks into it, I think I just started too hard, too fast, and all the beach walking doesn't help. Anyway, I developed a stress fracture in my right foot, and so I had to take some time off. And then my friends who I'd met along the way kept going, and I was really lucky that I actually a good friend of mine from back home, his sister had been living and had married a Kiwi and was in Auckland. So I had a connection there, and they actually put me up at their place for a couple of weeks while I was trying to stay off my feet. So I did that for just bed rest and on the couch for 2 weeks to try and let my foot heal as much as possible. And then I joined. By that time, the people I'd hiked with had reached the point of the trail where it turns into a river, and you have to get a kayak or rent canoes or something and wind your way down the river. And I thought, I don't need my feet for that. So I bussed and hitched to catch up with those guys and jumped in and paddled with them for a week down the Wanganui. And then by the time we got to the end of that, it's only been like 3 or 4 weeks, and you're supposed to give it 5 or 6 for a stress fracture. So I shouldn't be hiking yet. So I bought a used mountain bike and then cycle tour, just pedaling on the heel of my foot so I wouldn't put any weight on the front of my foot for the next 2 weeks, and paralleled where they were hiking and did some really easy tentative hikes into the mountains now and then to meet up with them and say hi and give them a little trail magic and stuff, but otherwise just cycle toured down the bottom of the North Island. And then by the time we were ready to switch to the South Island, where there's, I wouldn't say all the best scenery, but the better concentration of good scenery, I figured I was healed up enough to keep hiking. And yeah, all good. No re-injuries. So it worked out.
Nice. Now it's a mixed bag, as you described on the TA. Sorry. You've got the beach, and there's a lot of road walking as well, correct?
Yeah.
In some parts.
Yeah.
And then the other part of it is you're like in Lord of the Rings territory, where it's just absolutely beautiful and majestic. So it's an interesting trail.
Yeah, lots of extremes for sure.
All right. So you come back from New Zealand and you hit the CDT. Northbound or southbound? Northbound. Now, I've heard some pretty funky things about New Mexico, the New Mexico start to the CDT, in terms of water sources, in terms of probably back then, it was not as well established a trail as it is now. And even now, it's not that well established. But back in 2016, I had to imagine there'd be some wayfinding involved in your hike.
Yeah, the first 80 miles was basically posts in the desert, and not close enough together that you could always see them. It was somewhere in between. I think maybe 10 years before I did it, it would have been like map and compass or GPS navigation. Whereas when I did it, you could see a post or at least see the footprints take off in a certain direction as you're leaving the marker. And then the trails just split and disappeared immediately to nothing. But then as you found the other one and approached it, you'd see them all weave, fork back together and converge to that next post. And then you lose it again. And it's this just all day, and you're just in cactus sand country. And then you're just hiking from cache to cache, where they've got boxes in the desert with water caches that are maintained. And without those, I don't know what I should caveat this with this is from the monument that I started at. I don't know if there's still as much variation, but there was 2 or even 3 places that people would start at the southern terminus, just because of how easy it was to access and the issues we're talking about. Before, I guess they had a real established trail cache system in place. Starting from that monument, that be pretty intense, but it was great. It was coming from New Zealand. There were some sections where you're doing navigation, not really navigation, but you had to be comfortable cross country without a single track in front of you. So that I wasn't too worried about that. It was definitely a shift doing it in that type of environment, though, where there's just no water. So the risk of, or at least the consequences of getting totally lost are a little more severe. Yeah.
So did you have a map and a compass, or how did you deal with that uncertainty?
I carried physical maps for the PCT, never looked at them. I carried physical maps, for at least the start of the CDT, but this was right around the time where gut hooks was just becoming ubiquitous. So I think I switched to that pretty early on the CDT and was looking at my maps so infrequently and was hiking with a group. So it became, okay, if my phone dies or breaks or something, I'm not completely out of luck here. I would just go along with the rest. I'll just buddy up until the next town where I could fix it or something. So that, again, you can be reasonable. Yeah.
Yeah. CDT is another trail with different personalities. I mean, you've got the desert at the beginning, but then you get into the San Juans and you get into Wyoming and Montana. Any great memories from those portions of the trail as well?
Yeah, oh, they're all incredible. We did in Wyoming, there was a big one, a big alternate we did. That was at the time it was a very unofficial alternate. It was so big that it wouldn't really appear on gut hooks or now far out. But I think a lot of people are aware of it and often do it where you veer really far west and right after the winds and head up north through the Tetons. So you're not on the divide anymore, but the terrain you're going through is just a lot more interesting. And why would you miss out on that whole really noteworthy mountain range if you could link up to it? So we did that, which was really cool because I think it was almost like 200 miles where we weren't on the CDT, even though we still considered that we were hiking the CDT, but it's got that nature to it where it's a choose your own adventure. You're just staying on the spine of the Rockies and getting Mexico to Canada.
Fantastic. Any big animal sightings in Wyoming or Montana?
I'm pretty sure I saw a couple bears, but it was like ideal bear encounters. Like buddy up the trail points over there and you're like, oh yeah, there's a bear over on the side of that hill doing his thing. And you just look at it for a while and you're far enough away that they don't mind you, you don't mind them. And then you just move on. So I've had some fun, some more noteworthy, interesting bear encounters, but they weren't on the CDT. And I should mention that the CDT was when I got the idea for the Europe hike that we'll get to. That was definitely born on the CDT.
Okay.
Yeah.
Where was the bear encounter or the more interesting bear encounters?
A good one on the PNT, which was the next trail I did after the CDT. It was the following summer. And then last year on the Great Divide Trail, I had another heart pounder. Yeah.
Just an up close encounter where you surprised each other?
Yeah. Thankfully, the one last summer, the grizzly, the first time I realized it was even there was the sound of it running off. So thankfully it was running in that direction, but it was close. It was just below the trail, just like munching on berries. And I must have been like looking to the left and he was on the right kind of a thing. And it was at dusk. So they're active and moving around and past the time probably when most hikers were moving, because I needed to put in some pretty long days through this section to hit my reservations. The GDT is notoriously bad for logistics because you're going through all these really popular national parks and competing for whatever campsites are left over from all the other tourists. So you either book it right away at the beginning of when the reservations open up, or you just piece together something from the scraps of what reservations are left. And yeah, so I had to do back-to-back 30-mile days through this spot. And yeah, it was late at night and I'm just trying to get to camp, moving fast, should have been making more noise. And yeah, and sure enough, I spooked a grizzly. Thankfully, went the other way, but it was the size of it running away. I was, counting my blessings.
Yeah, spooking grizzlies doesn't always turn out well.
No, it's not what I want to be. It's not the way I want to encounter a bear out there.
All right. I think we've held our listeners in suspense long enough. Let's get to the main item here, the Trans-European Alpine Route, also known as, is it pronounced Tier or Tear?
I've been calling it the Tear. I think Tier is sad, whereas the Tear
right.
It's intense. It's tough.
Yeah, it's going to tear something. I bet you. So tell us, this is not an established route. This is you can't. Can you look it up on Wikipedia or on the internet and find anything substantial about the tear?
So I've got a blog that has all the information about it, like all the logistics, all the GPS tracks, water sources, resupplies, everything. Like you can go on my blog and find this and go and hike this next year if you want. And in fact, people have hiked it last year and there are some people hiking it this year. So it's become, in very small circles, an established idea at the very least, but it's absolutely not official. It was me on the CDT thinking, okay, I've hiked across countries and I'm doing it again. This is awesome. It's something I enjoy. I like being in the mountains and pushing myself. Would it be possible to walk across an entire continent, staying in the mountains, like as a hike, as a through hike, something that's worth doing scenically and that sort of idea, but that crosses an entire continent? And so that was the idea that popped in my head one day on the CDT. And then I just started scanning Google Maps and stuff, looking literally just at continents and where the mountains are. And immediately was like, okay, North America, South America would be possible. You can make a chain of mountains, but it's like way too big. You'd never finish it in a year. And if you're hiking through winter, like that's mountaineering, like that's not what was in my mind. And Asia, same idea. You can look at the Himalayas and everything east-west. You can see mountains, but too big, way too big. Africa, not really as continuous of mountains, still way too big. So you're left with Australia and Europe. Australia, the idea of crossing the outback was like, no, that's see, and also not nearly, well, too flat, right? But Europe, if you look at it east-west, it squiggles up a little bit as it arcs over the Mediterranean and stuff through the Alps, but you can see mountainous terrain east and west crossing the whole continent. And I was like, okay, that's where you do it. And it's Europe. So there's lots of people, lots of towns and villages. Like resupplying seems like it would be possible. You're never that remote. There should be a route here that makes sense. And then at the same time, it's so inhabited that there are so many established hiking routes that I started really digging in later, of course, once the CDT was finished, and piecing together something from established long trail networks in different areas and just jigsawing them together and connecting the dots. And then the current iteration of the tear is what I came up with. And then I hiked it in 2019.
Okay, so you put it together. You did this survey from Google Maps, put it together, and then you actually went out and hiked it.
Yeah.
And how long did it take you?
7 months. It was 200 and it's either a day under 7 months, something like that.
Okay,
yeah,
and give us, one. Yeah, that is. And give us the details on the route specifics. How long was it? How many countries? How many mountain ranges, etc.?
Yeah, so it's just under 4,000 miles. Crosses through, oh geez, if I get this wrong, I'll never forgive myself. I want to say it's 14 countries. One sec. I have to double check this.
I checked your blog. It is 14 countries.
It is. Okay. Right,
yes.
Thank goodness.
Spot on.
Wait, no. Oh no, I got 16 here. I'm looking at 16.
Uh-oh. You better update the blog.
And this is the thing. I'm looking at just a book that I grabbed. I'm going to double check this now because 14 seemed right in my mind. And the other thing is, while I'm looking this up, it crosses or like basically traverses 6 major mountain ranges or mountain systems. And that basically created the structure, the general structure. Those were what I was looking at when I just thought, okay, this will work. So it is 16 countries. There's a couple small ones in there that some people might say they don't count, like Liechtenstein. Yeah, you walk across Liechtenstein, but anyone can do that in like an afternoon. But hey, it's a country. It counts.
That's right. It counts.
Yeah, just under 4,000 miles, lots of vertical. I've got some fun stats about that, actually. So the length of the trail is very similar to the distance from the surface to the center of the Earth. So I just like to think about that. And
yes,
then
it's like the radius of the Earth.
Yeah, is roughly that long or that far. And then the amount of vertical, it ends up being like 27 Everests or so from sea level, but that becomes abstract too. Like that's a lot of them. And I've never climbed on Everest. Most people will never. How big is that? Another thing that I came across that was really cool was the total cumulative vertical is about 2/3, if you add it all up, the orbital height of the International Space Station. So again, I don't really have an intuitive idea of how high that is, but when I think of it like that, it seems suddenly like a whole lot.
Seems like a lot. Yeah. Very good.
Now, I started on the eastern side of Europe on the coast of the Black Sea in Bulgaria, and then headed west. So I'll just run through them real quick. Bulgaria, Serbia, North Macedonia, Kosovo, Albania, Montenegro, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Croatia, Slovenia, Italy, Austria, you're right in between them for a while, and then into Switzerland, and then France, and then Spain. Should be the full rundown.
Wow. Any problems when you're doing one of the long trails in America? You're in the same country. And any problems crossing borders as a hiker doing that trail?
So I didn't have any problems crossing borders. Again, that comes with being the privilege of coming from North America, where our passports can get us pretty much anywhere. So that's going to be different for depending on where you live and where you're from. Thankfully, yeah, the Canadian passport, North American passports, they open a lot of doors. So that was all good. The tricky thing, though, is the main Western Central area of Europe, all those countries have an agreement that they basically have shared borders. Once you're in there, once you land and one of them lets you in, you pass through country to country and there's no checkpoints, right? It's like traveling in between states or in between provinces here in Canada. So that's great for hiking in the mountains and crossing from this country to that country, because that's where the mountain range goes and that's where the hiking trail goes. Wonderful. But the problem is they also have shared limitations on how long you can be in those countries as a group, like as a whole. And that changed this year because they added Croatia to the mix. So that means you've got a whole extra pile of miles that you have to complete within this certain time window. And it's actually, for non-Europeans, it's making it basically impossible to do in one shot. You'd have to have a crazy flip-flop schedule or just knock it off in 2 chunks. For example, there's a couple of Americans doing it this year they're just planning to do half of it, and they'll come back next year and knock the rest off. So that's unfortunate, but there's actually been more interest in it from Europeans, which kind of makes sense. That's where they are.
Right. Now, I have to imagine that you didn't just create new trails, that maybe there are some existing trails that you've linked together.
Absolutely. Yeah. This was totally what is out there and how can I piece them together. Right. Yeah. There was one stretch where there was nothing in place. And again, I'm from half a world away. I'm not going to be able to create anything or get an idea even of where these local paths are, right? Sometimes there's stuff that exists it's like the origin of these paths, right? It was for the shepherds to get over to the next valley. It wasn't just to go for a nice stroll. So some of this stuff isn't even mapped, even though it does exist. And there were limits to how much I could plan into that. So that's this one section, which you hit fairly early on, and you pass through all these countries rapid fire. This is a lot of the Balkan countries like Serbia, into North Macedonia, into Kosovo, into Albania. There's not an established long trail to use through that section. And you have to pass through all these countries from one to the next at established border crossing spots. So it means you have to be on a road, right? That's where the border crossings are. So there's some road walking there and you just have to grind it out. But then after that, you get onto the Via Danerica, and then you get into the Alps, and it's good stuff.
Do you have a favorite section of the Tear?
I'd say the most beautiful is definitely in section, and I'm air quoting that. If I want to say something like the Alps, that's like 1,000-mile section.
Just a small piece. Just a small piece, yeah.
The Alps, just in general, are massive. They're just beautiful mountains and the trails through there and the history. Like, it's just great. The Pyrenees as well. So that's the border between France and Spain. Those are also incredible. Those are the standouts for sure. But then the Via Danerica was a very unknown thing in my mind. I think a lot of people have an idea of when you say the Alps, that conjures some images. Even the Pyrenees, people that have looked into hiking in Europe, they may have seen that name come up before. But if you talk about the Daneric Alps or like the mountains of Bosnia, at least for me going into this, Bosnia in my mind was just like a placeholder in bad movies about like impoverished, war-torn countries, right? This was the stereotype that I had in my mind. And then I get there and the wilderness is just beautiful. So that's a really cool area too, is going out through some of those countries.
Nice. Now, did you ever find yourself 7 months, 4,000 miles? Was there ever a time where you thought to yourself, what have I gotten myself into? What am I doing?
Yeah, so I started it with 2 buddies who I had met separately on different long distance trails, and I knew they were both badass hikers and everything, and I was so happy that I had like team to do this with, because I wanted to do it, and I was planning originally when the thought came up of attempting it myself, but then these 2 guys said, if you're serious, I'm in. This sounds awesome, and they joined me for the first 2 months. And then a couple weeks after one another, they both decided to bow out. And that was fine. We had never made any oaths or promises. We're all doing this ourselves. And so there were no hard feelings or anything. But the day that the second of them left and I realized I was on my own, that was a big mental that day was a big mental day, just figuring out, okay, am I going to go through with this? This is I knew it was going to be roughly a 7-month trip. So this is the next 5 months solo. And it's not the PCT or the CDT where you're going to come across other hikers and join up. Like it will be just me. You'll meet people in the huts. You'll say hi to someone on the trails, but like you will not, at the end of this trip, there will be no one I can go to and talk about experiences. They will be just mine. Am I good with that? And thankfully that day, like that very day where my second buddy decided to hitch out in the morning of, I went into this beautiful mountain, like protected area in the mountains, and ran into a group of guys, Serbian guys, all the while I was in Montenegro or Bosnia. Right at the border between them, I think. They were there doing a bachelor weekend for one of the guys, just do a boys' weekend. This is one of their events, was just going out to the mountains. And there was this little hut where the guy checked he took, not attendance, what am I saying? He's checking that you have your pass for the park, right? Not quite a ranger. This is very informal. But he's also bringing them shots. It's great. And they're a bunch of nice guys. And I hike out with them at the end of the afternoon. And then lo and behold, as we part ways, they not only do they give me a beer, one for the road kind of a thing. So I've got like a cold can of beer to have my dinner. By the time we get to the trailhead where they're walking off, I see in the distance, in the direction I need to go, like a nice ridge with a fire tower on it. And that's like a 20-minute walk away. So that's where I'm sleeping tonight, obviously. And it was a beautiful sunset, and it really just set my mind up. Okay, this is going to be okay. Like it'd be great to be doing the whole trip with those guys, but there's going to be awesome experiences, and it makes it all worth it. And like it was just reaffirmed all of that for me, and I think that had a pretty big impact on my mind for deciding to press on with everything. So that was a big moment.
That is very fortunate. That fire tower was waiting for you.
Oh yeah,
nice. Now you mentioned huts. So on the established trails, I'm sure there was a hut system. Did you also do a lot of tent camping in the kind of the non-established areas?
Oh yeah, I wild camped pretty much the whole trip. The only time I wasn't wild camping was if I was in an area like a national park that I had researched beforehand that explicitly has a rule about no wild camping. So you stay at the mountain huts or sometimes through even unmanned shelters. Not like as basic as like an AT shelter or something, but more like the ones people talk about in New Zealand. A room fully enclosed, no one's there checking anything. You just leave it better than you found it, and the local trail community usually takes care of it. There was a fair bit of that, especially through the Via Danerica and things like that. But even still in the Alps and the Pyrenees, there's mountaineers kind of basic huts. So those are great when I found them. Otherwise, I would wild camp.
Okay. And take us through your state of mind that you were in when you got into Spain. 7 months later, 4,000 miles later, and you finished the trip. What are you thinking? What are you feeling?
It's funny. So Spain's still a big part of the trip. It's the last country, but when I first finished the Pyrenees, let's say, that was the last hurdle. Get clear of the Pyrenees before the winter snows come in. And so a lot of people that have hiked the PCT or the CDT, they'll be familiar with that idea, right? If you're soloing either of those trails, you clear the Rockies or the Sierra by a certain date, and then the rest of the trail is fine. You're just going through the motions, right? If you were southbounding and once you get to Southern California, you're probably fine. You got San Jacinto and stuff, but yeah, or New Mexico. So it was like that. Like I cleared the Pyrenees just in time. I had one little snow flurry along the way, woke up with a couple inches on the ground, but didn't stick around. So that was fine. And then I get clear of that, and I've got to go across northern Spain where there's still like mountainous terrain, but it's definitely not at the level that I just passed. And so that's when it hit me that I still have a month of hiking left to do, and all the best scenery is behind me. And it's almost November. So it's just going to be cold and rainy. Northern Spain, that's like you're getting into their winter, but it's so close to the ocean that they won't get, except in the highest elevations, they don't get a ton of snow, but it's still wet and cold. And that was actually the toughest mental side of things, was finishing out that last month across Spain, knowing that all the best scenery was now behind me, but I still had like almost a month or 1,000 kilometers to cover to grind out. But the really nice thing was I met one guy in particular very early on when I briefly overlapped one of the Camino routes, the really popular one that starts in that same area, runs across northern Spain. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I met him, and he was a former through hiker. He had AT, PCT, and he was planning on he had done the PCT earlier that very summer, and he was just trying to stay in shape through the off season to hike the CDT the next year. And so we connected instantly, but then parted ways. But I kept in touch with him just over Instagram, I think. my route, which is more mountainous than the Camino, because that was the whole point of the route. It's like stay in the mountains the whole time. I was coming back down and we were going to intersect again, because I did finish this whole hike on one of the Camino routes, because the mountains disappear as you get to northwestern Spain. And that route, those walks are so iconic that I figured that it just makes sense to end with all the pilgrims there. We arrived at Santiago de Compostela like the same day, or maybe me the day after him. And then the last 3 days we hiked from that city, which is the traditional end of that hike, but there's kind of an extension that a lot of people do that goes right to the coast.
Right.
And he was doing that. The people he was hiking with were going to do that. So I had the company of other long distance walkers, even though our stories weren't identical. You still had that like camaraderie though to finish that out. So that was huge for me to finish out with them and with a bit of a team, and to be able to share that, right? Because we all appreciated what we're doing and could do that together. So yeah, it was great.
Awesome. Like most things in life, most things that are worth doing, there's going to be low points, but you have to find a way to work through those low points, and the payoff is usually there. Yeah,
for sure. Yeah, the feeling of standing at sunset, looking over the Atlantic Ocean, thinking that I just walked across a whole continent to get here. Yeah, you remember the tough times, but it also just like starts to melt away, right? Yeah, it was wild.
That's right. Hey, what's next for Dylan? What's the next big adventure? Right on.
I've got some plans for this fall. It's still tentative, but I'm thinking either PCT Washington or the Colorado Trail. Probably just going to see what's doing better in terms of the fire season, because they're about the same length. I want to do, and I've done both of them more or less on the PCT and then through the CDT, but love them both. And I would love to go do them again. And then jump over to southern Utah and do the Hayduke. And then once I get to the Arizona border, I actually haven't announced this, at least publicly on the interwebs. I've told some friends, but then I'm thinking southbound Arizona Trail FKT attempt, unsupported. So like doing a 20, probably 3-4 day food carry and just going full insanity pain cave on it. So that's the rough plan. We'll see if this sounds like a good idea as it gets a little closer, but yeah.
All right. I need you now publish that out to the world for everybody to hear. There's pressure on you now to do that. So after you successfully complete the Hayduke and set the FKT on the AZT, you need to come back on the podcast and share what those experiences are like, because those are like, additional, I like the way you put it, pain caves. That's a great way of looking at it. So will you come back on, Dylan?
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Absolutely. Good. All right. Hey, right on. You know where we are right now?
Oh, is it tip time?
Bingo. You know where you are. It's time for Hiking Hacks, where you get to share some trail wisdom with our listeners to make their next outdoor experience even better. So what do you have for us?
Okay. So the Sawyer Squeeze, I think a lot of people like the reliability and the simplicity of it, but the one knock they'll give it is just having to squeeze the damn bottle. But ever since the CDT, I'd say, is when I started doing this. I've been trying to preach the word, but apparently I haven't got it out. It's the Sawyer Sit. You get your 1.5 liter water bottle, of your dirty water bottle. You fill that up and you throw your filter on it, and you just find a little chunk of grass, hill, or a smooth rock or a log, and you just sit on it with the filter pointing forward between your legs. Then you use one of your free hands to just hold your clean water bottle. Now you've got the other hand free to check your phone or eat a snack or something. And there's zero effort. Like, you just sit on it and it filters, and it's effortless. It just seems like a no-brainer. And then probably if you start with a 1.5 liter, you'll get your 1 liter smart water or whatever you're using about half full on one good sit. And then you just hop up, twist it off, like burp it, let the air back in, round 2, and then the thing's full in no time, and you don't have to do anything. So I give it a shot. Sawyer Sit. The one problem is from the right or wrong angle, it looks exactly like you are just peeing into a bottle that you'll just take a nice refreshing drink from moments later. Yeah, so it can be a little awkward, especially if you're doing that like on a day use trail kind of a thing. But the trade-off is just you'll never have to, unless you're in camp and already like sitting in your sleeping bag or something, you never actually need to squeeze a bottle again. You just sit.
And who cares what it looks like? You got to do what you got to do, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, I like those moments, right? Like
That's right.
Yeah, you wait for someone to give you a weird look, and then you like, as soon as they walk by, you just have a chuckle with your buddy, right? Yeah, I know what they were thinking.
Excellent hiking hack. Thank you there, Dylan. So there you have it. We're just about done here. Hope our listeners enjoyed our time with RightOn. And you know what? I have said RightOn way more than you. You haven't said it once other than explaining what the trail name is. So congratulations there.
Thank you.
And I want to thank him also for joining us this week. Dylan, how can our listeners keep up with you on social media, and where can they find updates on your latest adventures?
Yeah, so my blog that has all the info about the TEAR, the Trans-European Alpine Route, is mountainsandme.ca. Yeah, Canada. And then my Instagram is mountains.andme. And that's probably all you need.
Okay. Remember to check out Hiker Trash Radio on social media as well. We're on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. No TikTok yet, RightOn?
No, I'm not that with it. I'm not hip.
Yeah, me either, but I try. And if you have comments or clips you want to share, you can send it to me at hikertrashradio@gmail.com. Now, unfortunately, we can't always be on the trail. And when we're not, we need to find a way to get our adventure fix. So RightOn, I'm going to ask you to share some outdoor adventure media with our listeners to help them get by. This could be a book or a movie or a documentary. We call this segment Off the Beaten Path. What do you have for us?
So I'm going to nerd out a little bit right here. So for anyone, in some context with the Arizona Trail thing, the food weight, as you can imagine, is such a big factor. So I've been taking a deep dive into nutrition and caloric density and all that good stuff. And the best resource for this, if you're like hardcore, this is going to decrease your insanity scale by a good, you just watch this and you're down 10, 15 points, I'm sure. But yeah, the YouTube channel Gear Skeptic has a whole video series of going right into this stuff and how to knock that food weight down if that's something you want to focus on, even as a video on how to choose foods that are more compact if you're going to be in an area that's like bear cans and you're like, oh, how do I make it all fit? Like, for me, this was like super useful stuff as I'm making these preparations. So anyone else that's thinking like FKT kind of stuff maybe, and they want to optimize next level, nerd out some of their trail math, Gear Skeptic has some good stuff, but it's not casual Netflix watching. This is homework. So be warned.
Love it. We're always looking for some good homework on the podcast here. That's great. And before we wrap things up, just one more segment for you called What Have I Not Asked You That You're Dying to Tell Us About? What do we miss?
Ooh, I had a couple things point formed here that I was wondering about. Oh, we talked about everything. It was my fun facts about the length of the TEAR, and we covered it. And visas, how that's a tricky thing I don't want to dash anyone's dreams. Covered that. Now, the one other thing. Okay, the high point of the TEAR. We were talking about all the basic stats, and I never pulled that one out. So the high point is 13,200 feet. Actually, that's almost identical, I think, to the PCT. I think Forrester's
13.2. That's right.
Oh, okay. There we go. So very similar to that, except instead of going over a pass, basically to get up to the top of that pass, you're walking along a glacier on the TEAR, but it's super safe, as safe as a glacier can be. Like, it's very smooth and gradual, so it's not crevassed and stuff. And there's a year-round skiing. People, as you're walking up this slope, there will be people skiing by you on this one path that goes below the ski lifts that is compacted and groomed or whatever they do. Anyway, yeah, so there is a mandatory, if you stick to the quote-unquote official track of the TEAR, the official high point is over a big glacier at 13,000 feet. But yeah, you don't need any glacier gear for it, or at least, I don't know, this is not professional advice. Don't come crying to me if you forgot, you don't feel safe without your ice axe or ropes or something. But yeah, it's the tamest thing in the world, but it was cool.
I forgot to ask you, there's one other thing that I'm dying to tell us about, or dying to have you tell us about. You created this route. What is the permitting process? If someone's interested, they have to send money to you and get a permit from you?
I should say yes. Yeah, no, all the information I've posted on my blog there. I didn't want to paywall anything. I posted it all originally and then threw up a post on Reddit on our ultralight, and people like, the reception was great, but the biggest thing people said was, you should write a book. And I was like, oh, that makes sense. That's a good idea. But I didn't want to it didn't seem to make sense to me to make a trail guide for it. Because one, I just pieced together a bunch of trails that already exist. So you can just get those trail guides. They've already been written. And two, what, are you going to carry this thing? 4,000 miles worth of trail guides? There's no way.
Too much weight.
Way too much weight. And as stuff changes, because this is not a set in stone thing, people that hiked last year and a handful of people that are attempting it this year, in contact with them and throwing like alternates their way, saying, hey, check this track out. If it looks good, go for it and let me know what you think. I think it might be more scenic than the alternative, or this depth has more water sources, but I don't know if it goes, or all sorts of stuff. And so people are giving me feedback and I'm tweaking the route as it goes. If I published a guidebook that was like, this is the trail, then it would just get out of date immediately. So having it all digitally just makes sense. But there was such a demand for it that I was like, you know what, I will make a book, but it's just all photography from the whole route and just talking more large scale about the areas you're passing through, the national parks you're passing through, some of the history of the area, the stuff I learned on the way that was like, oh, that's really like those little nuggets, right? It's not necessary to know to hike this, but it's cool pieces of culture and history and stuff like that. So that's what I packed it with and made more of a coffee table book. So that's, people, if they visit the site, they'll see me shilling that anyway. So I figured I might as well plug it now.
Is that already available?
Yeah, it's on Amazon. It's printed on demand because I had no idea what the interest would be in all of this stuff. So if you order it, it'll take a couple weeks to get to you because they literally will make it on demand and then ship it out. But yeah, and then I take a little cut and it goes to me keeping the info for the route updated. So if people are interested, that's awesome. But otherwise, all the data is on my site, totally free. So
nice.
Go crazy.
What is the title of that book?
The Trans-European Alpine Route, Hike Across a Continent.
That makes sense. Brilliant. All right. Hey, we are finished. Thank you for coming on the podcast, Ron. We wish you the very best in your future adventures, including the Hayduke. I love to hear about the Hayduke after the facts. Keep us posted. And the FKT attempt of the AZT. And as I said earlier, I hope you'll consider coming back on and telling some more stories. As we close up today, do you have any shout outs to friends and family, Dylan?
Yeah, definitely. My mom and dad have always been supportive of all this. The craziest thing I always think of is, as much as I know my mom worries when I'm out there, without fail, if I hint to a piece of backpacking gear for Christmas or something, yet every year she will give it to me. So that takes a lot. So thanks, Mom.
Add it to the gear room.
Yeah, exactly.
That's right. All right. Hey, thank you for tuning in. Always remember, the trail is the trail. Doesn't care if you want to go downhill. Doesn't care if it's almost dark and you're looking for a campsite. It doesn't even care if you're 2 months into a 7-month hike and your buddies have left you all alone. The trail is the trail. Embrace the suck.